The Lexicanum entry for Lion L. Johnson lists his titles in order: the Lion, the First, Lord of Angels, Knight of Nihilus, and one more, easily overlooked: the Duelist. That designation comes from a Chaos emissary cataloging all 20 Primarchs for Lorgar Aurelian. The emissary assigned each one a name capturing his defining essence, a title based on external evaluation from observers with every reason to study the Primarchs carefully. The Lion's title from that assessment was the Duelist. Not the Strategist, though Malcador the Sigillite described his strategic brilliance as rivaled perhaps only by Horus. Not the Hunter, though he survived alone in a monster-infested forest for what the legends suggest was close to a century. The Duelist, the thing his enemies reached for when they had all his qualities to choose from. On the other side of the heresy, another Primarch walked up to Fulgrim of the Third Emperor's Children, the man almost every community discussion treats as the finest technical swordsman among the 20, and stated something. Verbatim, from Scars by Chris Wraight, Horus Heresy number 28. "You have some reputation as a swordsman, brother, but I make no boast when I tell you I would leave you choking on it." That was Jaghatai Khan, pronounced Jagathai Khan per the GW Fandom Wiki. Primarch of the 5th White Scars, the man whose brothers respected his blade prowess before they acknowledged anything else about him, per Wraight's own character note in the same novel. 2 Primarchs, both carrying fight records most community discussions compress into footnotes. The on-page lore has been building the case for both across decades of novels, supplements, and short fiction, and a feet-by-feet read of the primary texts produces something the vibes-based tier lists consistently miss. One obvious wrong answer needs clearing first, because the conversation almost always starts there. Magnus the Red, Master of Prospero, Primarch of the 15th Thousand Suns, is one of the most powerful beings in 40k fiction. His canonical descriptor is the most numinous, meaning the most psychically gifted among the Primarchs. Primary text in A Thousand Suns by Graham McNeil, Horus Heresy number 12, documents him communing with the Emperor telepathically from across the galaxy before they'd physically met, and eventually breaching the Emperor's Webway project through an act of desperation that fractured Imperial history. His psychic abilities operate at scales his brothers can't approach. That scale is the problem when applied to a dueling argument. The same psychic power that makes Magnus categorically terrifying makes him expensive to sustain in any combat predicated on endurance or prolonged personal engagement. His documented physical exchange against Leman Russ during the burning of Prospero, across both A Thousand Suns and Prospero Burns by Dan Abnett, Horus Heresy number 15, shows him holding his own in direct combat when he chooses to engage that way. Magnus can fight. He is a Primarch, and every Primarch is among the most capable physical combatants their species has produced. But the question being prosecuted here is specific. Who is the finest blade-to-blade duelist, stripped of the power multipliers that define Magnus's combat identity? That question is the one Magnus solves least efficiently. His entire combat characterization runs through psychic force. Community discussions that ask specifically about blade skill and fight outcomes reach Angron, Fulgrim, the Lion, and the Khan before reaching Magnus, and that ordering reflects something real about how the primary texts distribute these fighters' identities. The word duelist gets treated in community shorthand as synonymous with most powerful combatant overall, and that's where every Primarch ranking goes sideways. Magnus solves the most powerful combatant version of the question. He doesn't solve the duelist version. The title the Lion's enemies gave him suggests the distinction matters precisely in the way most tier lists ignore. Fulgrim, Primarch of the Third Emperor's Children, titled The Phoenician, is the community's working answer to the question of finest technical swordsman, and the reputation has a defensible basis in the primary record. The Warhammer 40k Fandom Wiki documents him as having mastered every strategy and tactic of war, with an approach to swordsmanship characterized by theoretical study alongside obsessive physical practice. He doesn't just fight well, he fights correctly, by the standards of whatever martial traditions the Primarchs developed in the long years of the Great Crusade. His orientation towards swordsmanship is scholastic, documented form, studied in texts, refined through deliberate practice towards something that approaches a physical ideal. His documented fight record includes one verified, decisive, unambiguous win at Primarch level: the killing of Ferrus Manus, Primarch of the 10 Iron Hands, in Graham McNeil's Fulgrim, Horus Heresy No. 5, published July 2007. Ferrus Manus wasn't a soft target. He carried living organic metal in his forearms that gave him preternatural grip and striking power, was widely acknowledged as one of the physically most formidable of the 20, and the killing blow came in what the community treats as the most emotionally devastating combat scene in the Heresy series. That win is on the record. Community discussion on this, a dedicated Reddit r/40k lore swordsmanship thread, captures the consensus. In terms of pure skill, Fulgrim takes it hands down. He's the best technical swordsman. He studies the theory and practices the form in dusty old texts and all. A Space Battles forum thread on the same matchup lands on a similar split. Fulgrim's technique and balance are probably a bit more flawless. Neither source is primary lore. That's community analysis of primary lore. But the consensus they represent is consistent enough across independent discussions that it reflects something the primary text actually supports about how Fulgrim is characterized as a fighter. Fulgrim is the measuring stick. Every other claim in this argument gets assessed against what it means to be operating at or above that level. Keep that in mind, because both the Lion and the Khan make claims relative to it, and the lore's treatment of those claims is what makes this debate worth having. The Lexicanum entry on Lion L. Johnson's combat history begins earlier than most discussions acknowledge. When the Dark Angels first assembled to meet their Primarch at the Legion's ancient stronghold at Grimeri, the Lion didn't make a speech. He tested them. Without power armor himself, facing a Terminator-clad captain in cataphractii plate with a power field-wreathed blade, the Lion matched his Calabonite steel against that weapon and left the captain wounded in the dust. The Lexicanum records that both sides learned a respect for the other. That phrase covers what happens when a Primarch in ordinary equipment dismantles a superhuman soldier in the heaviest armor his legion could provide. The Lion's approach to authority was demonstration. He showed his legion what he was before asking them to follow him, and the form the demonstration took was a blade duel against their best officer. From that day, per the Lexicanum, he renamed them the Dark Angels after an old Caliban myth. He repeated the method at Grimeri. The Council of Masters had assembled to formally confirm the Lion's command over the full First Legion. 100,000 Dark Angels scattered across Great Crusade campaigns, waiting for a leader they hadn't yet accepted in their bones. His opponent was Pyrrhus Caligat, master of the Host of Fire, the ceremonial champion of the Council, specifically designated for this trial and presumably built for it. The Lexicanum records the result as an hour-long legendary duel. The Lion won. He accepted the titles of Grand Master of the First Legion and formal command of the 6 wings of the Hexagrammaton: the Death Wing, Raven Wing, Dread Wing, Fire Wing, Iron Wing, and Storm Wing. An hour against a champion selected to defeat him, in front of an entire legion watching to be convinced. That's what convinced them. The same man who'd just beaten a Terminator-armored captain in unprotected Calibonite steel now fought for an hour against the Legion's ritual dueling champion and took the Legion's highest titles at the end of it. The Dulon incident is more complicated than either side usually presents. On the campaign world of Dulon, the Dark Angels and Space Wolves fought together against the independent Foch Empire, whose ruler had personally insulted Leman Russ. After the battle, Russ confronted the Lion over tactical disagreements, struck him, and the Lexicanum records what followed. The two proceeded to wrestle for a day and night without victory for either combatant. A solar day and night against Leman Russ, whose aura was enough to make Azek Ahriman, the Magister Templi of the Thousand Suns, kneel before him through sheer presence alone, documented in 1,000 Suns. The lion fought to a prolonged standstill with no resolution in sight. What that standstill tells you about both fighters is more significant than most recaps of the incident acknowledge. The ending does complicate the record. The lion struck Russ while he was laughing, which ended the fight. The Space Wolves consider this a cowardly act. The Lexicanum notes that Russ swore he would avenge the slight to his honor, and to this day the two chapters fight honor duels in remembrance of this event. Whether that final blow represents predatory opportunism consistent with a hunter's philosophy, or a violation of the unspoken rules governing Primarch contests depends on the reader's framework. The meaningful data point is the day and night standstill that preceded it, against a fighter who operates at the very top of any honest physical tier list. Conrad Kurz, Primarch of the 8th Night Lords, titled Night Haunter, is the opponent who makes the Thramas Crusade the most analytically significant phase of the Lion's documented record. His combat ability is categorically distinct from every other Primarch among the 20. He suffers from prophetic visions, violent, apocalyptic foreknowledge of futures that haven't arrived yet. In combat, this manifests as something close to pre-movement anticipation. He reads what you're going to do before you've committed to doing it, processes multiple potential futures, and acts on that foreknowledge before your strike has begun. This isn't offensive psychic power in the Magnus sense. It's built into his perception itself. A fighter who can't be surprised in any meaningful sense because he's already living slightly ahead of the present moment. Beating Kurz in a direct fight means beating someone who, in principle, already knows what you're going to do before you've decided to do it. The fight record between the Lion and Kurz spans Prince of Crows and Angels of Caliban by Gav Thorpe, Horus Heresy number 38, published by Black Library in 2016. Thorpe documented the arc structure on his personal blog, gavthorpe.co.uk, in a spoiler post written around the time of publication. Across the earlier engagements, the fights don't go cleanly for either fighter. The Lexicanum records the first exchange at Sagwalsa, the lion left with a slashed throat, Kurz with a sword in his back. Both fighters carry damage out of that encounter. Neither ends it decisively. What follows that opening exchange is where this fight arc becomes the most revealing document of the Lion's combat identity in the entire Heresy record. After one of the later confrontations, Kurz does something that should be impossible. He boards the Invincible Reason, the Lion's flagship Gloriana-class battleship, one of the most heavily fortified vessels in the Imperial fleet, crewed by Dark Angels Astartes, under the command of the most tactically capable mind in the Legion, and he makes it his hunting ground. The Lexicanum records that he wreaked terror throughout the ship, killing any search team the Lion sent after him. Eventually, the Lion personally takes up the hunt, stalking his brother through the corridors of his own vessel. For 16 weeks. 16 weeks! 4 months of searching on his own flagship. Teams of veteran Dark Angels Astartes, some of the finest soldiers in the Imperium, sent to locate and contain a single Primarch moving through their own ship. And Kurz killed every one of them before the Lion arrived to hunt alone. Whatever the precognitive Night Hunter represents in a dueling analysis, the 16-week hunt on the Invincible Reason tells you what he represents as a predator in confined space. He turned the Lion's home into his territory and held it for 4 months against the finest search and destroy capability the Dark Angels could muster. The Lion never caught him. That's the opponent. Understand what you're measuring against before you measure the outcome. The final confrontation with Kurz occurs at Alma Mons during the Imperium Secundus period, documented in Angels of Caliban. The Lion has been hunting Kurz across Ultramar, convinced his brother is operating among the rebels in the Illyrium region of Macragge. He deploys the Dreadwing to flush him out. He corners him. And the physical confrontation that follows, after months of intelligence work and the managed escalation of an entire regional campaign designed to produce this exact engagement, is what the text renders directly. Thorpe's blog post on the Angels of Caliban arc, posted on gavthorpe.co.uk, confirms. The Lion attacks Kurz, while the two dual Corswain and his companions fight against the infamous. The wider battle is happening around them. The Lion's fight is happening at its center. The primary text, preserved in a Reddit excerpt thread that has been cross-referenced against multiple discussions of the novel, gives you this. The Lion seized him in both hands, dragged him up, and then drove him down, smashing the Night Haunter into the hard floor. Again, and twice more, the Lion beat Kurz against the unyielding stone. Kurz twisted like a hooked fish. One moment in the Lion's grip, he breaks Kurz's back. The precognitive Night Haunter, who spent 16 weeks making the Invincible Reason his hunting ground, who fought the Lion to mutual damage at Sagwalsa, who held an early encounter to a point where the Heresy Online review thread records, Kurz holds dominance and was killing the Lion. That opponent ends up driven repeatedly into unyielding stone until his spine gives. The Thramas Crusade fight arc, which began with the Lion leaving with a slashed throat, ends with the Night Haunter's back broken in Angels of Caliban. The question the community has spent time working through: how do you defeat someone whose combat advantage is seeing what you're going to do before you do it? The primary text of Angels of Caliban doesn't give you an explicit mechanism. It gives you the outcome and the fighter who achieved it. And from those two elements, the analysis builds a coherent theory. Kurz's precognitive ability, at the level it's depicted in the Night Lord's material, processes decision chains. Intent to strike, target selection, commitment to a movement pattern. A fighter who plans in conscious sequences, who formulates a combination, selects a target zone, commits to a line of attack, generates readable signal for a precognitive reader. The foreknowledge works on decision chains because decisions are structured, sequential, and psychically legible. They announce themselves before they arrive. A fighter whose combat processing bypasses conscious decision entirely produces something different. The Lion's combat characterization throughout his documented record returns persistently to predatory, instinct-driven response rather than deliberate calculation. Malcador the Sigillite's remembrances, preserved in the Fandom Wiki, describes him as an apex predator, always watching, always planning, always hunting, even in non-combat settings. The Arcs of Omen supplement, published by Games Workshop in 2023, gives you his internal state during combat against Angron in direct primary text. There was no thought, only the primal urge to kill, not calculation, instinct operating at speeds that calculation can't match. If Kurz's precognition reads decision chains, a fighter who doesn't produce conscious decisions in a readable sequence may be generating noise rather than signal, responses that arrive from below the threshold that foreknowledge reads. This is the community's best analytical inference from the documented characterization. The mechanism isn't stated in the primary text of Angels of Caliban. The outcome is the evidence. What the Lion's established fighting style, combined with the fight result, suggests is that Kurz's advantage didn't resolve the encounter in Kurz's favor, because the Lion's instinctive combat may have been producing something Kurz's foreknowledge couldn't read cleanly. The Lexicanum's entry on the full Lion-Kurz fight arc ends with the Bolter and Chainsword forum's noted observation from the Angels of Caliban spoilers thread. The fight itself didn't leave the Lion unscarred, but he also threw in Kurz's face that he had passed up his best chance at killing him. That detail matters for what this fight means in context. The Lion won. He also knew Kurz had let him live once, and he carried that knowledge into the final confrontation. Two Primarchs who had been trying to understand each other across years of mutual hunting, across a ship that became a charnel house for 16 weeks, finally reaching a resolution that left the Night Haunter broken on the floor of Alma Mons. The next exhibit in the Lion's record comes from a different era entirely. Arcs of Omen, The Lion, a Games Workshop campaign supplement published in 2023. The source format is worth flagging at the outset. This is a GW campaign supplement, not a Black Library novel. The narrative content is canonical. The fight exists in shorter prose form rather than a full novel's scene development. The setting is the demon world of Wormwood, created by Vashtor the Archiphane as a deliberate parody of Caliban, the Dark Angel's destroyed homeworld, recreated as an affront to the unforgiven. Commander Dante's Blood Angels and Azrael's Dark Angels are engaged against Angron's World Eaters when the Lion arrives through the Forest Walk, stepping out of Mir Caliban and into the battle. Angron, Primarch of the 12th World Eaters, born Angronius of Nuceria, Lord of the Red Sands, carries the Butcher's Nails, psychic neural implants that transform every biological function, including breathing, thought, and heartbeat, into sources of constant pain. His combat exists in relation to that constant pain. Violence is the only relief. As a demon Primarch, the Red Angel, fully ascended through Khorne's service, that baseline is embedded in his demonic nature and layered with whatever supernatural power his ascension added to it. Community analysis consistently places Angron at 1 or 2 in the raw melee tier. Games Workshop itself, promoting this fight, described it as, "It's the fight of the year." In the red corner, Angron, the Red Angel, and in the green corner, Lion, the Lion, L. Johnson. GW marketed this as a genuine contest, not a demonstration. The VS Battles wiki entry for the Lion in his 42nd Millennium form, drawing from the Arcs of Omen supplement directly, is explicit about the power differential. The Lion fought with Demon Angron and later banished him, though was generally weaker than him. The Lion returning from 10,000 years of stasis recovery isn't at his historical peak. The Lion, Son of the Forest, by Mike Brooks, provides the primary text establishing this. The Return novel documents the Lion slowly reclaiming his capabilities, aware that he's not yet what he was. The confirmed excerpt from the supplement gives you the fight's character in precise language. The Lion was revealed in the act of slipping around Angron's flank for yet another goading strike. There was no thought, only the primal urge to kill. Read the phrase, "yet another goading strike," carefully. Not the first such strike. A repeated pattern, the Lion executing the same approach multiple times because this approach is deliberate rather than opportunistic. He isn't waiting for Angron to make a mistake. He's engineering the conditions under which Angron will make one. Slipping around the flank, striking to provoke, withdrawing. Slipping around the flank again, striking again. Angron, whose combat is defined by the Butcher's Nail's demand for escalating violence, encountering a fighter who keeps refusing to provide a target that can be overwhelmed with direct power. And the excerpt catches the Lion mid-sequence, mid-pattern, in the act of executing that approach for the 4th or 5th time in the same fight. The outcome is confirmed across multiple sources. Angron is banished. The Red Angel, in his strongest post-ascension form, against a Lion operating below his historical ceiling, is banished from Wormwood. The Lion, per the GW campaign supplement's narrative, ends the engagement standing. The tactical reading of how that happened is built directly from the supplement's own language. A fighter who slips around the flank repeatedly rather than engaging directly isn't winning through physical superiority. He's winning through a strategic use of the opponent's nature, provoking overextension from a berserker engine designed to destroy whatever is in front of it, then using the opening that overextension creates. Against the community's consensus pick for top raw melee, while operating at a reduced state, the Lion's fight record from the supplement shows an outcome through method rather than through force. His complete documented record in named opponent combat, the captain of the company at the Legion reunion, dispatched in the first demonstration. Pyrrhus Caligot, in a legendary hour-long duel at Gramarye. Leman Russ to a solar day's standstill at Dulon. Conrad Kurz across multiple engagements, ending with the Night Haunter's back broken in Angels of Caliban. Daemon Angron banished in Arcs of Omen, the Lion. The title his enemies gave him, the Duelist, not the Survivor, not the Strategist, the thing they reached for first. Jagathai Khan's combat reputation in community discussion collapses too quickly into fast on a bike, which flattens what Chris Wraight establishes across 4 novels of White Scar's primary material. Wraight's own character note on the Khan, collected in the Lexicanum from his Black Library blog entry. Even his brother Primarchs understand little of him. His prowess with the blade earns him their respect, even as his waywardness causes them concern. Prowess with the blade. That quality runs through every relationship the Khan has with his brothers. Guilliman's distrust, Russ's exasperation, Lorgar's contempt for him as an untutored savage, as the one acknowledged given. Whatever else the brothers disagree about, blade prowess isn't contested. It's the admission every one of them makes before noting their reservations about him. His fighting style, documented across the Wraight novels and the Lexicanum summaries of those novels, is speed-based and adaptive. He studied how his brothers fought. He tracked their patterns, their preferences, their tendencies under pressure. The Lexicanum records his operational tempo during the Siege of Terra at the Eternity Wall, a White Scar's jet bike charge led by the Khan personally, during which he killed over 40 Death Guard in a single engagement before being overwhelmed by numbers. 14th Legion Astartes, the Death Guard, who were built specifically to absorb damage that killed other Astartes, whose endurance and resilience were the defining characteristics of their legion, in one charge. He also killed the Keeper of Secrets Manusha Rakshasi inside the Webway during the events of the Path of Heaven, per the Lexicanum citation of that novel, adding a named greater demon kill to a record that also includes 2 documented fights against Mortarion himself. The first encounter with Mortarion is documented in the Path of Heaven by Chris Wraight, Horus Heresy number 36, after Mortarion fails to convince the Khan to join Horus, and the conversation shifts register. The confrontation that follows puts their contrasting natures in direct relief. The Khan's speed against Mortarion's endurance. Neither fighter could resolve the encounter on the timescale available. When the strategic situation shifted, when the fleet engagement overhead changed the calculus of what Mortarion could afford, he withdrew. Not because he was beaten, because he recognized in the middle of the fight that this fight wasn't going to give him what he needed in the time he had. That's data point 1 on this matchup. The Fulgrim scene needs precise framing before reaching the final exhibit, because the community shorthand for it typically inflates what actually happens. The encounter in Scars is a conversation, not a duel. Fulgrim is attempting to recruit the Khan to Horus's cause during the early heresy, and the dialogue that follows is the Khan's definitive rejection of both the offer and the man delivering it. What the Lexicanum records of the scene's setup: "I heard you do strange things to your warriors," the Khan said. Fulgrim offered to come and fight him on his own terms. The offer itself is revealing. Fulgrim's instinct, when confronted by skepticism, is to propose a physical contest. That's the Phoenician's confidence in his blade. The Khan's response to the offer is what follows. He doesn't take it. Instead, he says, "You have some reputation as a swordsman, brother, but I make no boast when I tell you I would leave you choking on it." The precise construction matters as much as the content. He explicitly notes he's making no boast. This is a statement of assessed fact, flat, unadorned, delivered without emotional investment, without the performance of confidence. The Khan has studied how his brothers fight. He's been watching. He's evaluated Fulgrim's capability as a matter of martial discipline, the way he evaluated every opponent's capability, and his conclusion, stated to the man's face, without embellishment or theatrical weight behind it, is that the Phoenician's reputation wouldn't be enough. The bolter and chainsword forum thread on this exchange lands on the right reading. The Khan wasn't looking to banter or verbally spar. He called Fulgrim out on his reputation in the crassest way possible to shut him the hell up. That's the scene's function in the novel. The Khan isn't posturing. He's closing the conversation. Fulgrim doesn't physically concede in response. No bowing occurs in the primary text. No formal acknowledgement. What the scene establishes is something more structurally significant. The man the community considers the finest technical blade among the 20 had the full weight of that reputation dismissed by someone who had assessed it privately and found it insufficient. The weight comes from what Fulgrim represents. The dismissal carries force proportional to the target of it. The decisive exhibit isn't verbal. Warhawk, the Siege of Terrace series, Chris Wraight, covers the Khan's final documented confrontation with Mortarion. By this point, Mortarion has fully ascended to demonhood. He is the greatest demon prince of Nurgle, carrying 10 years of demonic enhancement on top of everything that made him nearly impossible to put down as a mortal Primarch. His scythe, Silence, is as long as a mortal man is tall. The barbarian plate he wears was designed by his own hand to process and synthesize the poisonous atmosphere of Barbarous, now adapted to channel Nurgle's gifts. Whatever the Path of Heaven encounter showed about the matchup between speed and endurance, the Warhawk calculation doesn't apply here. This fight begins from a point of greater disadvantage for the Khan than any they've shared before. The Lexicanum documents the sequence in detail, citing Chapter 14 of Warhawk. The Khan's forces have launched a massive assault on the Lion's Gate spaceport, one of the strategic pivots of the entire siege's final phase. During the height of the fighting, Mortarion and the Khan close on each other directly. The Khan approaches the fight on 2 levels simultaneously. Physical combat is one. The other is harder to categorize. He uses words as weapons. He scolds Mortarion for weakness, for surrendering to Nurgle, for giving up the resistance to outside power that Mortarion had spent his entire life claiming as his defining characteristic. Mortarion, whose identity before the heresy was built entirely on the idea that he yielded to nothing, who hated the Emperor in part because the Emperor rescued him from Nikare rather than letting him claim that final victory himself, finds that identity directly attacked by someone who had faced every temptation the heresy offered, who had been approached by Magnus and Mortarion and Fulgrim and Horus's agents and had refused every one of them. The Khan, still loyal, still unmarked by chaos, is standing in front of the Death Lord telling him what he gave away. Mortarion, the Lexicanum records, flew into a rage, and the Khan took advantage of that rage to launch a second wave of dizzying attacks that overwhelmed the Primarch. Then Chris Wraight writes the sentence that defines the entire encounter, preserved in the Goodreads excerpt collection, confirmed against multiple reader discussions of Warhawk. Mortarion was still the greater of them. He was still the stronger, the more steeped in preternatural gifts. But now, all that he felt was doubt. Wraight writes that sentence during the fight, not as a pre-fight assessment, not as post-battle reflection from a safe distance. In the middle of the engagement, while blows are being exchanged and the Lion's Gate spaceport burns around them, Mortarion, the stronger fighter, the more powerful one, the one with supernatural gifts the Khan has explicitly and permanently refused, is doubting. Because the Khan has found the thing Mortarion can't defend against, the truth of what he chose to become, delivered by someone who refused to make the same choice. And then the Khan is impaled on Mortarion's scythe. The Lexicanum, citing Chapter 14 directly, the badly wounded Jaghatai Khan was impaled on the blade of Mortarion's scythe, but simply pulled his body along its length to get face-to-face with the Deathguard Primarch. The Loyalist Primarch decapitated Mortarion, who was banished into the warp in a massive explosion similar to that of a vortex weapon. He pulled himself along the weapon that had just run him through, the scythe inside his body. The gap between him and a demon Primarch who was physically and supernaturally his superior at every measurable level. He closed that gap by moving toward it, using the weapon that should have ended him as a rail to close the distance, while near dead by any standard his own physiology could apply. And then he decapitated the Death Lord. The explosion when Mortarion was banished registered at vortex weapon scale, one of the most destructive munitions in the Imperium's arsenal, released in the middle of an active war zone. What follows that is documented in the Lexicanum's account of the aftermath. The Khan's body was discovered by Ilya Revalian and Jaghatai Khan, who sought to bring him to Malcador. Malcador attempted to heal him. The Lexicanum records Malcador noticing, partway through the attempt, that the healing he was witnessing exceeded what he himself could have achieved. The Emperor had intervened directly. The intervention required to keep the Khan alive was beyond what the Sigillite, the second most powerful human psyker in the Imperium, could manage on his own. His next documented appearance is the Grand Council of Reconstruction, still badly wounded, supported by 2 warriors on either side. The entire debate about the Imperium's future, Dorn and Russ and the Lion pushing for immediate pursuit of the traitors, Guilliman arguing for consolidation, the newly empowered High Lords weighing in, produced exactly one contribution from Jaghatai Khan. 2 words per clause from a raspy throat. Build later. Hunt now. His record against Mortarion spans 2 Wraight novels and 2 fundamentally different versions of the same opponent. In The Path of Heaven, the Khan fought a mortal Primarch in a contested engagement defined by speed advantage against endurance advantage. In Warhawk, he defeated a fully ascended demon Primarch who was explicitly stronger than him while being impaled, through a combination of psychological disruption and the decision to keep moving after the weapon was already inside him. One community-sourced feat needs brief acknowledgement because it was in the brief and this audience will notice if it disappears without comment. The fencing and reading scene, the Lion reportedly sparring while simultaneously reading a document, widely cited in discussions of the Lion's combat instincts, doesn't appear in verified primary text across the review and excerpt record compiled for this argument. Plot reviews and discussions of Descent of Angels by Mitchell Scanlon. Lion L. Johnson, Lord of the First, by David Geimer. Angels of Caliban, by Gav Thorpe. And The Lion, Son of the Forest, by Mike Brooks, don't reference it. The only textual source this research located traces to a document that isn't a Black Library publication. If it's in a short story or audio drama not covered in this source set, name the title in the comments. That's exactly the kind of verification this audience does better than any individual researcher. What's canonical and fully documented is the underlying principle the scene would illustrate. The Lion's combat is characterized throughout primary text as instinctive and predatory, rather than deliberate and calculated. Malcador's Remembrances, preserved in the Fandom Wiki and Lexicanum. Even at a council of war, the Lion moves like an apex predator. He is always watching, always planning, always hunting. The Arcs of Omen supplements text. There was no thought, only the primal urge to kill. The fight record from Gramarye through Wormwood builds that characterization in outcomes rather than in a single memorable scene. The fencing story would be illustration. The fight record is evidence. The argument forks here, and both directions are genuinely supported by the lore. Fulgrim is the community's answer to finest technical swordsman, and the primary record doesn't directly contradict that consensus. His characterization throughout the Emperor's Children material is built around studied precision, the theoretical and practiced refinement of blade form towards something approaching an ideal. The Fandom Wiki documents him as having mastered every strategy and tactic of war. His approach to swordsmanship is the most deliberate, most studied, most deliberately cultivated among the 20. The Lion and the Khan both build their records differently. The Lion's fighting is characterized as instinctive and adaptive, predatory processing rather than the execution of trained form. The Khan's fighting is speed-based and psychologically layered, physical quickness combined with the studied knowledge of how each opponent moves and what pressure they can't resist. Neither of them operates through Fulgrim's mode of cultivated technical correctness. But here's what the primary text, in 2 different Wraight novels and a GW supplement, refuses to let resolve cleanly. The Goodreads excerpt from Warhawk. Mortarion was still the greater of them. He was still the stronger, the more steeped in preternatural gifts. But now, all that he felt was doubt. That sentence exists in the novel to tell you something the broader lore returns to repeatedly. Strength and supernatural gifts don't predict fight outcomes reliably in this fiction. The stronger fighter doubted. The weaker one didn't stop. Mortarion's physical and supernatural superiority failed as predictors of the result. What determined the outcome was in the gap between those gifts and the willingness to pull yourself along the blade already inside you. The Angron fight from Arcs of Omen produces the same structure from the Lion side. By every physical metric, Angron should end the encounter. Top-tier raw melee, fully ascended demonic power, the Berserker engine the World Eaters were designed around. The Lion's confirmed excerpt shows him executing yet another goading strike. Not a decisive blow, but a repeated provocation, working a pattern against an opponent whose combat nature can't resist the escalation that pattern demands. The outcome is a Lion victory against an opponent who is physically stronger. Fulgrim, with the finest documented technical blade form among the Primarchs, doesn't produce equivalent consistency against top-tier named opponents across the Heresy record. His kill of Ferrus Manus stands as a genuine win, and an honest prosecution acknowledges the limits of what the available evidence can adjudicate about his full record. The Heresy does complicated things to Fulgrim that fall outside this argument's scope. What the lore refuses to do, through Wraight, through Thorpe, through the GW supplement, is crown a single winner that settles every definition simultaneously. These fights are structured to resist clean hierarchy. Wraight gives you a winner who is explicitly weaker than the opponent he defeats. Thorpe gives you a Lion who breaks the Night Haunter's back only after the Night Haunter made the Lion's flagship his hunting ground for 16 weeks. Neither outcome produces the simple answer a ranked list wants. The split from the complete record. If best duelist means finest blade technique, the evidence and community consensus point toward Fulgrim, with the Lion and the Khan acknowledged as reaching similar outcomes through different methods. The Lion's in-universe title complicates that reading. His enemies used the word duelist for him rather than for Fulgrim, and those enemies had every reason to study all 20 carefully before making that choice. If best duelist means most consistent winner in documented named opponent combat against opponents at the top of the tier, the Lion's record, Caligot, Kurz, Angron, builds the stronger case by volume of verified outcomes. If best duelist means winning the fight you should lose by refusing to stop before your opponent does, the Khan's record in Warhawk exists in a separate category from everything else in the novels, and the preserved Wraight text establishes why. The stronger fighter doubted, and the weaker one pulled himself along the blade until the range closed. The Lion was given his title by the people with the most incentive to assess him accurately. His fight record from Gramarye through Wormwood supports why they reached for that word when they had all his qualities to choose from. Jagathai Khan told Fulgrim, the man his brothers acknowledged as the finest blade technician among the 20, that he'd leave him choking on his reputation. Then he impaled himself on Mortarion's scythe and won anyway, because he wasn't finished until the Death Lord was banished. 2 records, 2 definitions of what best duelist means when you go through the text rather than the tier lists. Which definition do you use? Drop it in the comments. The lore supports both answers, and that's precisely why neither one dies quietly. Subscribe for more lore prosecutions like this one.